had never told anyone, not even my own son, that I earn $100,000 a month. He always assumed I lived a simple, ordinary life, and I liked it that way. It never occurred to me that this secret, this quiet independence I cherished, would one day become a problem. Then, one evening, my son Michael surprised me with an invitation. "Mom," he said, almost casually, "I want you to meet Anna's parents." The way he said it made it sound like a small, routine matter, but I knew it wasn't. Suddenly, I was thrust into a world where appearances, social standing, and unspoken expectations would be tested, my private life quietly colliding with theirs. I spent that night thinking about how to handle the meeting. Should I tell them everything about myself? Or keep up the modest image Michael had always assumed? I decided on a little experiment. I would reveal only enough to protect myself, to show them who I truly am without giving away my wealth or using it as leverage. My apartment in Brooklyn was modest by New York standards, but to me, it was perfect. Comfortable, safe, and just a few blocks from the park where I loved to walk early in the morning. I didn't need a penthouse in Manhattan. I didn't crave designer labels, flashy cars, or extravagant vacations. I traveled when I wanted, ate where I enjoyed, and wore clothes that fit me and made me comfortable. Spending more did not equal living better. That was a lesson Michael had never learned. The next day, I prepared for the meeting with Anna's parents. My plan was simple: be honest, warm, and grounded. I wasn't going to impress them with money or status. I wanted them to see me as a person, someone who had built a life of independence and values, not wealth. When I arrived at their apartment, the first thing I noticed was the contrast to my own home. Everything was pristine, polished, and carefully arranged to show success. Marble countertops, abstract paintings, and gleaming surfaces. Anna's mother, Laura, greeted me with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her handshake was firm but measured, the kind that tests you for confidence and grace. Her father, David, followed with a nod and a slight lift of his eyebrows, the silent way of saying he was evaluating me. Laura's question came quickly, almost as if she'd rehearsed it. "Sophia, tell me, what do you think of me? Not as Michael's mother-in-law, but as a person." Her words caught me off guard. I had expected curiosity, judgment, maybe even subtle interrogation about my career, my finances, or my upbringing. But this was different. She wasn't asking for approval. She was seeking understanding. I looked her in the eyes and answered honestly. "I see someone trying to navigate the life she inherited, questioning values that were instilled in her, and realizing there's potential to be so much more than you've been taught to be." Tears glimmered in her eyes. "I've lived my whole life trying to please my parents," she admitted quietly. "The right school, the right friends, the right interests. But Michael was my first real rebellion." Her confession reminded me of the universal struggle between family expectations and personal choice. I nodded, recognizing the weight of her upbringing. "And yet, you accepted their help," I said gently. "The apartment, the honeymoon, the contract your father arranged?" Laura looked down. "I know how it sounds," she whispered. "But in our family, money has always been the language of love. Refusing it is almost impossible when it's the only way you've been taught to feel cared for." I understood her completely. Money instead of warmth, gifts instead of connection. She exhaled, as if unburdening years of invisible pressure. The tension that had existed between us softened in that quiet acknowledgement. We spent hours talking. For the first time, I saw behind the layers of etiquette and expectation. Laura confessed her fears, her insecurities, and the doubts she had carried about raising a daughter in a world that judged women for appearances and social standing. I shared parts of my life as well, not wealth, not success, but the lessons learned through independence, choices, and personal integrity. By the time our conversation ended, something had shifted. Laura hugged me, not out of politeness, but genuine warmth. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not judging me for past mistakes." I smiled in return. Everyone deserves the chance to be better than yesterday. When I returned home that night, the city lights of Brooklyn sparkling beneath me, I felt a sense of quiet victory. This wasn't about impressing anyone with money or status. It was about honesty, understanding, and the subtle power of living authentically. I knew that the path ahead with Anna's parents would have challenges, but it would also be real, and for the first time, that felt like enough. The weekend came faster than I expected. Michael insisted we meet at Anna's parents' house for dinner. I had spent the week carefully planning my approach, rehearsing how much of myself to reveal and how to navigate questions about my life without letting my earnings dominate the conversation. When I arrived, the house was alive with laughter and the aroma of roasted chicken and fresh herbs. Anna welcomed me warmly, a mixture of excitement and nervous energy in her eyes. "Mom's told me so much about you," she said, pulling me into a hug. I smiled, appreciating her sincerity. Her parents, David and Laura, led me into the dining room. Everything was perfectly arranged, from the polished silverware to the crystal glasses. I felt the familiar tension of being evaluated before I even sat down. But I reminded myself, this was not a contest. I had nothing to prove except my character. Dinner began with small talk. Weather, local events, Michael's work. Then Laura glanced at me and asked casually, "Sophia, what do you do for work?" I chose my words carefully. "I run a consulting business," I said, keeping it neutral. "It allows me to manage my own schedule and pursue projects I care about." David raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "And what kind of projects?" "Mostly small businesses, helping entrepreneurs refine strategy and operations. I enjoy seeing people succeed on their own terms." My voice was calm, measured, but I could feel the curiosity in the room sharpen. Laura's eyes lingered on me, reading between the lines. "And does it pay well?" she asked, delicately. I hesitated only a moment. "Enough to live comfortably, travel when I want, and support myself independently." Her gaze flickered, a subtle acknowledgement that she understood more than I was saying. I smiled inwardly. The dance of revealing without flaunting was underway. Michael, as always, tried to keep the conversation light. "Mom's very practical," he said, his tone teasing. "She's always been independent, and that's one of the reasons I admire her." Anna laughed softly, clearly enjoying the dynamic. "I can see why you'd say that," she replied. "It's impressive, the way you manage everything and still have time for family and friends." I appreciated her candor, but I remained cautious. This was not about impressing them with success. It was about establishing a foundation of respect and understanding. As the evening continued, stories of childhoods, family traditions, and minor embarrassing moments surfaced. Each anecdote was an opportunity to connect, to show that beyond the polished surfaces, we were all human, flawed, vulnerable, and capable of growth. At one point, Laura leaned closer, her voice quieter. "Sophia, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," I replied, meeting her gaze. "Do you ever regret living independently, making your own path, rather than following the traditional path your parents might have expected?" I considered her question carefully. There were moments of doubt. I admitted. Moments when following the conventional route seemed easier, safer. But ultimately, I realized that living authentically, making decisions based on my values rather than expectation, was worth every challenge. She nodded slowly, absorbing my words. It's rare to meet someone who values independence over conformity, she said. I wish I had learned that sooner. Dinner drew to a close, and dessert arrived, a homemade apple pie, warm and fragrant. We sat back, sipping coffee and reflecting on the evening. I felt an unexpected connection forming, a fragile yet genuine bridge between my world and theirs. Before leaving, Laura pulled me aside. Sophia, thank you for coming tonight, she said softly. For being yourself, for treating us like people and not judging our imperfections. I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with money or status. Thank you for welcoming me, I replied. Family isn't just about appearances. It's about honesty, care, and understanding. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt a sense of accomplishment and relief. I had navigated the first encounter without compromising who I am. The journey ahead with Anna's parents would have challenges, certainly, but for the first time, I felt prepared to face them with confidence, clarity, and a quiet assurance that I could maintain my independence without alienating the family that mattered to Michael. Walking back to my apartment, I reflected on the evening. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about being seen for who I truly am and recognizing the humanity in others, even when their world seems polished and intimidating. That realization felt more valuable than any material success or monetary figure. The days after the dinner were quiet, almost deceptively so. Michael seemed relaxed, but I noticed a subtle tension in his messages, a carefulness in his tone that suggested he knew something I hadn't yet uncovered about his family's expectations. I couldn't help but replay the evening in my mind, thinking of every glance, every question, every slight pause. Anna had been cheerful, almost bubbly, when she texted me the next morning. Mom and Dad can't stop talking about you. They really liked having you over. And Michael? He seemed proud. I smiled at her words, but beneath them lay the reminder that appearances can be deceiving. I had learned long ago that being liked was one thing, being fully trusted and respected was another. I spent the morning working on a consulting proposal, trying to keep my mind occupied, yet my thoughts inevitably drifted back to the family dinner. Something subtle had lingered, a quiet tension beneath Laura's polite words, the way David's eyes had lingered on my hands while I spoke. They weren't hostile, but there was curiosity and judgment. I realized then that my life, my independence, my financial success, it was not something they could fully understand without reassessing their assumptions about Michael's world and the people in it. When Michael suggested we go for a weekend brunch with Anna and her parents, I hesitated. Brunch was casual, intimate, different from the formal dinner, but also a space where personalities clashed and the truth often slipped out. I agreed, telling myself it was an opportunity to strengthen the fragile bridge I had started to build. The cafe was quaint, with sunlight streaming through tall windows, highlighting polished wood tables and soft, warm colors. Laura greeted me with her familiar cautious warmth, and David nodded as if to say, "We'll see how this goes." Conversation flowed easily at first, discussing local events, travel plans, and Michael's work, but I could feel the undercurrent of observation. They were trying to understand me, and I, them. Then Laura asked the question that had been quietly lingering in the back of my mind. Sophia, do you ever feel lonely, managing everything alone, balancing work and personal life? Her words hit deeper than she probably intended. I had spent years balancing independence with a sense of solitude, learning to embrace both. Sometimes, I admitted. But I've also learned that being alone doesn't mean being unhappy. I've built a life that allows me freedom and choice, even if it comes with moments of solitude. David leaned back, studying me. Freedom is admirable, he said slowly. But isn't there a part of you that wants stability, someone to rely on? I considered his words carefully. Stability doesn't always come from others, I said. It comes from knowing who you are, what you value, and being confident in your decisions. Relationships, family, friends, partners should enhance that stability, not define it. The conversation shifted, but I could sense the tension had not fully lifted. David and Laura were processing something unspoken, perhaps my independence, my earnings, or simply the reality that Michael's life intersected with someone who didn't fit their conventional expectations. Later that day, Michael and I walked through a quiet park. The autumn leaves crunched beneath our feet, and the cool breeze carried the scent of damp earth and distant coffee shops. "You handled dinner and brunch so well," he said, breaking a comfortable silence. But I could tell they were surprised. "I noticed," I admitted. "They're trying to reconcile their image of you with the reality of me. But it's normal. It's a process." Michael stopped, taking my hand. I don't want them to think you're overstepping or making things complicated." I smiled gently. "I'm not here to compete or to impress. I'm here to be myself. And if that challenges their assumptions, it's their journey, not mine. You don't need to apologize for who I am, Michael. You only need to understand it." The following week, subtle signs of friction appeared. Michael's parents would comment lightly on how Anna should help more at home, or how Michael should consider traditional paths. I realized then that their concern wasn't personal. It was cultural, a reflection of their worldview clashing with mine. I decided to act deliberately, showing patience without compromising authenticity. I offered to help with small things, engaged Anna in planning a weekend project, and even cooked a simple meal to bring to their house. Each gesture was a statement, not of wealth, but of thoughtfulness and integration into their family dynamics. Through these actions, I noticed a subtle shift. Laura's questions became less pointed, more conversational. David's nods of acknowledgement grew warmer, accompanied by occasional smiles. The bridge I had started to build was becoming a proper path. But I knew it would take time, and one misstep could undo months of careful navigation. That realization reminded me of the delicate balance of family dynamics, independence, and honesty. Money, status, or personal success could only carry me so far. Empathy, patience, and transparency were the true tools for connection. By the end of the week, I felt cautiously optimistic. Michael held my hand a little tighter that evening, and Anna's laughter sounded freer, more genuine. And though the family still had unspoken questions about my life and choices, the subtle tensions had eased. I understood now that integration was less about forcing acceptance and more about consistently showing respect, authenticity, and willingness to connect without compromise. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of appearances, small gestures, and unspoken boundaries. Each encounter with Michael's family became a test, not of my patience, but of perception. I realized quickly that their questions weren't about me. They were about their own assumptions, the image they had of Michael's life, and the reality that someone like me existed within it. It was a quiet Wednesday evening when the first real challenge appeared. Anna called, her voice tense and hesitant. "Mom, Michael's parents want to have a private conversation with me about you." I felt a flicker of anxiety, but I reminded myself to stay grounded. "Just listen, Anna. Understand their concerns, but don't take it personally. You're their daughter now, and navigating family dynamics is part of that. When I arrived, Laura and David greeted me politely, but there was a palpable intensity in their expressions. They wanted to understand who I really was, and perhaps more importantly, what kind of influence I could have on their daughter and son. Laura began with what seemed like casual questions about my work. "Sophia, you must have an interesting schedule with all that consulting. Do you find it hard to balance work and personal life?" I smiled. "It can be demanding, but I've built routines that allow me to thrive in both areas, and I value the moments I spend with family. They're rare, but meaningful." David, sitting beside her, leaned forward. "And about your income, Michael mentioned you make quite a bit. Do you ever worry that could overshadow Anna's family life or create complications?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Money isn't a barrier to connection. It can complicate things if it's used to control or manipulate. But I've never used it to impose on anyone, and I never will. What matters is respect and understanding, not the size of a paycheck. There was a long pause. Laura exchanged a glance with David, a silent conversation in their eyes. I felt the weight of their curiosity and judgment, but I remained composed, anchored in who I was. After the meeting, I walked with Anna to a nearby park. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, and leaves crunched softly beneath our feet. "Mom, that was intense," she admitted. I didn't know how to respond to some of their questions. They seemed cautious, like they're worried about you taking over my life somehow. I squeezed her hand. "Caution comes from care, not hostility. They're trying to protect you in their own way. But you also need to see me as I am, not a threat, not a challenge, just a person who loves you and your brother. That's all." Over the next days, Michael noticed a change in me too. I was more introspective, careful in my interactions with his family, yet unyielding in my authenticity. One evening, while we shared a quiet dinner at our apartment, he asked, "Do you ever get tired of having to prove yourself? Of managing their perceptions?" I looked at him, my eyes steady. "Sometimes, yes. But it's not about proving myself. It's about showing who I am, consistently and honestly. If they struggle to understand, that's their journey, not mine." He reached across the table, resting his hand on mine. "I admire that about you. Most people would feel cornered or insecure, but you handle it with grace." I felt warmth in that recognition, but also a reminder that balance was crucial. Every action had consequences, especially when lives and emotions were intertwined. The first real test of boundaries came unexpectedly. David invited me to join a small family project, a weekend charity event that required collaboration and commitment. It was an opportunity to demonstrate goodwill, but I knew it would also reveal subtle tensions, especially with traditional expectations at play. The morning of the event, I arrived early, dressed casually yet elegantly, ready to contribute without asserting dominance. Michael and Anna followed shortly after, and together we navigated the complex web of tasks, responsibilities, and interactions. Laura observed closely, occasionally offering guidance, while David focused on logistics. Throughout the day, I found ways to engage meaningfully, organizing tasks, coordinating volunteers, and even sharing small insights that helped the event run smoothly. Each gesture was a subtle demonstration that my presence added value, not chaos. By the afternoon, Laura approached me quietly. "Sophia," she said, her tone softer than before. "You handled everything very thoughtfully. I admit, I had concerns at first, but seeing you in action, I understand a little better now." I nodded, appreciating the honesty. "Thank you. That means a lot. My goal isn't to replace or overshadow. It's to connect, collaborate, and contribute. That's all I hope for." By the end of the weekend, there was a quiet transformation. Laura's smiles were less measured, David's nods more genuine. Even Michael seemed relieved, a weight lifted from his shoulders. As we walked back to the car, Anna whispered, "Mom, I think they're starting to see you differently. Less suspicious. More human." I laughed softly, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. "Good, but remember, Anna, this is only the beginning. Patience, consistency, and honesty. They're the tools that will sustain this connection over time." That night, lying in bed beside Michael, I reflected on the past weeks. Navigating family dynamics, especially with the complexities of independence, income, and cultural expectations, was exhausting yet enlightening. I realized that authenticity was both my shield and my bridge. Without it, I would never be accepted, no matter how much effort I put in. And as sleep finally claimed me, I understood a fundamental truth. Love and connection are not about winning approval. They're about showing up fully, without compromise, and trusting that others will eventually see the value in who you truly are. The weeks after the charity event felt like walking a tightrope. Every conversation, every visit, every small interaction with Michael's parents carried subtle tension, like a faint current pulling me in different directions. I knew that acceptance wouldn't come overnight, and yet I could sense small shifts, glimpses of recognition that I was not a threat, just someone who genuinely cared. One Friday evening, Michael invited me to join him for dinner at a trendy downtown restaurant. The reason, he said, was simple. He wanted me to unwind, to step outside the family dynamic and focus on us for a change. But when we arrived, I noticed Anna's hesitance and Michael's nervous energy. Something was off. Before I could ask, Anna leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, my sister Emily has been asking questions about your job, your income, everything. She doesn't say it outright, but she's suspicious. I think she feels replaced or overshadowed." I nodded slowly, absorbing the truth. This wasn't just about appearances or polite introductions. It was about navigating a subtle, unspoken rivalry, one that stemmed from insecurities rather than malice. When we finally met Emily and her husband, the tension was palpable. Emily's smiles were sharp, her compliments edged with curiosity, as if she were testing every word, every gesture, to see if I belonged. "Emily," I said warmly, extending my hand. "It's lovely to meet you. I've heard so much about you from Anna." She shook my hand, but didn't smile fully. "All good things, I hope," she replied, her tone polite but distant. Dinner progressed with careful conversation, discussions about work, hobbies, and shared interests. I made an effort to engage without dominating, listening actively, offering insights when appropriate, and keeping the atmosphere light yet sincere. Michael watched silently, occasionally interjecting to redirect a conversation or support a point I made. Midway through the evening, Emily leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Sophia, I hope you understand. I don't mean to be intrusive, but we've always been protective of Anna. We just want to make sure she's not being influenced by someone too different from us." I felt a flicker of frustration, quickly tempered by empathy. "I understand completely. Protectiveness is natural. But I hope you also see that my intentions are genuine. I don't aim to replace anyone or control anything. I'm here because I care for your family, not to disrupt it." Her eyes softened, just a little, and for a moment, the tension lifted. But I knew that trust would take time to build, and words alone would never suffice. Actions, consistency, and integrity were the currency of acceptance. After dinner, as we walked back to our car under the glow of streetlights, I felt the weight of every interaction, every glance, every unspoken judgment. Michael held my hand tightly, sensing my unease. "You're incredible," he whispered. "No matter how challenging this feels, you're handling it better than anyone could expect. I wish my family saw that sooner." I smiled faintly, though my mind was already racing ahead. It's not about them seeing me as incredible. It's about being who I am and trusting that, eventually, they'll see the value in authenticity. I can't force it. I can only show it. The following week brought another challenge. Anna confided in me that Emily had started asking pointed questions to her parents, subtly undermining the progress we'd made. Laura and David, sensing the tension, approached me privately one evening. "Sophia," Laura began, her voice gentle but serious, "we appreciate everything you've done and the respect you've shown. But we need to understand where your boundaries are and how you navigate interactions with Emily. She's protective, and sometimes her approach creates friction." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. "I understand. My goal is never to compete or confront. I aim to connect, collaborate, and respect everyone's role, but I also must remain honest and firm in my values. That's the only way relationships can thrive authentically." David added, "We see that, Sophia, and we admire your integrity, but family dynamics, they're complicated. Sometimes your presence will cause unease, even unintentionally." I took a deep breath. "I accept that. My presence may disrupt comfort zones, but I promise it will never disrupt love or loyalty. That is my guarantee." Over the next days, I carefully balanced interactions. I spent time with Anna, encouraged open conversations with Michael, and maintained patience with Emily, even when her questions felt probing. Slowly, subtle changes became noticeable. Emily's comments were less pointed, Laura's nods more frequent, David's advice more inclusive. Acceptance wasn't complete, but progress was real. One evening, as I sat alone reflecting on the past months, I realized how much I had grown through this experience. Navigating judgment, subtle rivalry, and deep-seated expectations had strengthened my resilience, clarified my values, and reinforced the importance of authenticity. I understood that love, whether between family members or partners, was not about perfection or approval. It was about showing up consistently, without pretense, and trusting that integrity would eventually bridge divides. When Michael joined me later, he held out his hand and smiled. "You did it, Sophia. Not because they changed overnight, but because you stayed true to yourself. That's what matters." I took his hand, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. Yes, it's not the approval that counts. It's being who we are and letting that speak for itself. Everything else will follow in its own time. As we looked out the window at the city lights, I knew that the journey wasn't over. Challenges would continue. Misunderstandings might arise, and patience would always be necessary. But one truth remained clear. Honesty, empathy, and steadfast authenticity were the keys to connection, no matter how complex the relationships became. And in that quiet moment, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had crossed lines, faced silent confessions, and weathered judgment. I had remained myself, and in doing so, I had built bridges where walls once stood. The following weeks felt like walking through a fog, each interaction layered with uncertainty. Emily's cautious glances and restrained questions had not disappeared entirely, but they no longer carried the sharpness that once made my stomach knot. Every small acknowledgement, every tentative smile, was a tiny victory, a proof that persistence and sincerity could soften even the most protective walls. One Sunday afternoon, Michael suggested we host a casual family brunch at our apartment, a chance for everyone to relax, converse naturally, and share ordinary moments without the formal tension of dinners or events. I agreed, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. This was my chance to show that I could belong without forcing the situation, that my presence could coexist with their history, their routines, their expectations. I spent the morning preparing, carefully arranging flowers, setting the table, and choosing dishes that reflected both warmth and simplicity. I wanted the atmosphere to feel inviting, not overwhelming. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath, smoothed my blouse, and opened the door. Anna was the first to arrive, her eyes lighting up with genuine delight. "Mom, you did all this?" she exclaimed, hugging me tightly. "Yes," I said, smiling, "but it's for all of us to enjoy together." Emily followed, her expression guarded but noticeably softer. Michael's parents walked in last, carrying small gifts and exuding a polite but watchful energy. As everyone settled, the initial awkwardness lingered only briefly before the rhythm of conversation began to flow naturally. Topics ranged from lighthearted discussions about hobbies to more meaningful exchanges about family experiences, childhood memories, and future plans. Emily asked questions, but this time, they were curious rather than accusatory. I responded honestly, sharing insights about my work, my passions, and the small joys that made my life feel rich and fulfilled. At one point, Emily leaned toward me and whispered, "I can see why Michael values you so much. You're different, but in a good way." I smiled gently, nodding. "Thank you, Emily. That means a lot to me." By the end of brunch, the atmosphere had transformed. Laughter replaced tension, shared stories replaced suspicion, and for the first time, I felt truly included, not as an outsider tolerated, but as someone accepted and respected. Michael held my hand across the table, his eyes reflecting pride and relief. Later, when everyone had left, Anna lingered. "Mom," she said softly, "I've seen the way they've started to change. It's slow, but it's happening. You made this work without trying to fight anyone. You just were yourself." I hugged her, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Anna, the only way to create lasting connections is with honesty, patience, and respect. Everything else, fear, suspicion, judgment, fades over time if you stay true." That evening, as Michael and I relaxed together, he turned to me with a mixture of admiration and relief. "You did it, Sophia. Not because anyone changed instantly, but because you stayed grounded in your values. You didn't let their doubt shake your integrity." I leaned back, exhaling deeply. "I learned something important," I admitted. "Acceptance isn't about changing people. It's about showing up consistently, without pretense, and trusting that time and sincerity will reveal your true worth." Michael smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "And look where it brought us. Not just acceptance, but peace. You've bridged a gap that seemed impossible at first." In the quiet of our apartment, I reflected on the journey, the subtle tests, the moments of judgment, the silent rivalries, and the gradual shifts in perception. I realized that life rarely offered neat resolutions, but perseverance, empathy, and authenticity could carve a path through even the most complicated relationships. Weeks turned into months, and the bonds strengthened further. Emily's guardedness softened into genuine curiosity and even camaraderie. Anna felt reassured that her family could embrace someone new without losing its sense of history. Michael's parents expressed their appreciation openly, acknowledging that I had navigated a delicate balance with grace. And for me, the triumph was quiet yet profound. I had revealed my truth, maintained my values, and respected the dynamics of those around me. I had not sought control or approval, only connection, understanding, and integrity. One evening, as I watched the city lights shimmer from our apartment window, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The challenges had been real, the judgments sharp, and the road long, but the destination was worth every step. Michael joined me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "We built something meaningful," he whispered. "Yes," I agreed softly. "Something based on honesty, patience, and love, and it's stronger for all the challenges we faced." We stood there together, silent but connected, knowing that the journey of family, trust, and acceptance was ongoing. But in that moment, I allowed myself to savor the peace, the recognition, and the quiet triumph that comes from staying true to oneself. I had crossed boundaries without overstepping, faced judgment without resentment, and created bridges where walls once stood. And in doing so, I had discovered a truth far deeper than approval: that authenticity, kindness, and resilience could transform even the most complex relationships into bonds of genuine understanding. For the first time in months, I felt fully seen, not just for what I did or how much I earned, but for who I truly was. And that, I realized, was the most valuable recognition of all.